Chapter 23 of A Dog Crusoe and His Master. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Allison Hester of Athens, Georgia. The Dog Crusoe and His Master by R.M. Ballantyne. Chapter 23. Savage Sports. Living Cataracts. An Alarm. Indians and their Doings. The Stampedo. Charlie again. One day Dick Varley was out on a solitary hunting expedition near the rocky gorge where his horse had received temporary burial a week or two before. Crusoe was with him, of course. Dick had tied Charlie to a tree and was sunning himself on the edge of a cliff, from the top of which he had a fine view of the valley and the rugged precipices that hemmed it in. Just in front of the spot on which he sat, the precipices on the opposite side of the gorge rose to a considerable height above him, so that their ragged outlines were drawn sharply across the clear sky. Dick was gazing in dreamy silence at the jutting rocks and dark caverns, and speculating on the probable number of bears that dwelt there, when a slight degree of restlessness on the part of Crusoe attracted him. "What is it, pup?" said he, laying his hand on the dog's broad back. Crusoe looked the answer. "I don't know, Dick, but it's something, you may depend on it, else I would not have disturbed you." Dick lifted his rifle from the ground and laid it in the hollow of his left arm. "There must be something in the wind," remarked Dick. As wind is known to be composed of two distinct gases, Crusoe felt perfectly safe in replying "yes" with his tail. Immediately after he added, "Hallo, did you hear that?" with his ears. Dick did hear it, and sprang hastily to his feet, as a sound like, yet unlike, distant thunder came faintly down upon the breeze. In a few seconds the sound increased to a roar, in which was mingled the wild cries of men. Neither Dick nor Crusoe moved, for the sounds came from behind the heights in front of them, and they felt that the only way to solve the question, "What can the sounds be?" was to wait till the sounds should solve it themselves. Suddenly the muffled sounds gave place to the distinct bellowing of cattle, the clatter of innumerable hoofs, the yells of savage men, while at the same moment the edges of the opposite cliffs became alive with Indians and buffaloes, rushing about in frantic haste, the former almost mad with savage excitement, the latter with blind rage and terror. On reaching the edge of the dizzy precipice, the buffaloes turned abruptly and tossed their ponderous heads as they coursed along the edge. Yet a few of them, unable to check their headlong course, fell over and were dashed to pieces on the rocks below. Such falls, Dick observed, were hailed with shouts of delight by the Indians, whose sole object evidently was to enjoy the sport of driving the terrified animals over the precipice. The wily savages had chosen their ground well for this purpose. The cliff immediately opposite to Dick Varley was a huge projection from the precipice that hemmed in the gorge, or species of cape or promontory several hundred yards wide at the base, and narrowing abruptly to a point. The sides of this wedge-shaped projection were quite perpendicular. Indeed, in some places the top overhung the base, and they were at least 300 feet high. Broken and jagged rocks, of that peculiarly chaotic character which probably suggested the name to this part of the great American chain, projected from and were scattered all around the cliffs. Over these the Indians, whose numbers increased every moment, strove to drive the luckless herd of buffaloes that had chanced to fall in their way. The task was easy. The unsuspecting animals, of which there were hundreds, rushed in a dense mass upon the cape referred to. On they came with irresistible impetuosity, bellowing furiously, while their hoofs thundered on the turf with muffled continuous roar of a distant but mighty cataract, the Indians, meanwhile, urging them on by a hideous yell and frantic gesture. The advance guard came bounding madly to the edge of the precipice. Here they stopped short, and gazed affrighted at the gulf below. It was but for a moment. The irresistible momentum of the flying mass behind pushed them over. Down they came, absolutely a living cataract, upon the rocks below. Some struck on the projecting rocks in the descent, and their bodies were dashed almost in pieces, while their blood spurted out in showers. Others leaped from rock to rock with awful bounds, until, losing their foothold, they fell headlong, while others descended sheer down into the sweltering mass that lay shattered at the base of the cliffs. Dick Varley and his dog remained rooted to the rock as they gazed at the sickening sight as if petrified. Scarce 50 of that noble herd of buffaloes escaped the awful leap, but they escaped only to fall before the arrows of their ruthless pursuers. Dick had often heard of this tendency of the Indians, where buffaloes were very numerous, to drive them over precipices in mere wanton sport and cruelty, but he had never seen it until now, and the sight filled his soul with horror. It was not until the din and tumult of the perishing herd and the shrill yells of the Indians had almost died away that he turned to quit the spot, but the instant he did so another shout was raised. The savages had observed him, and were seen galloping along the cliffs towards the head of the gorge, with the obvious intention of gaining the other side and capturing him. Dick sprang on Charlie's back, and the next instant was flying down the valley towards the camp. He did not, however, fear being overtaken, for the gorge could not be crossed, and the way round the head of it was long and rugged, but he was anxious to alarm the camp as quickly as possible, so that they might have time to call in the more distant trappers and make preparations for defense. "Where away now, youngster?" inquired Cameron, emerging from his tent, as Dick, taking the brook that flowed in front at a flying leap, came crashing through the bushes into the midst of the fur packs at full speed. "Injuns!" ejaculated Dick, reining up and vaulting out of the saddle. "Hundreds of 'em, fiends incarnate, every one." "Are they near?" "Yes, an hour'll bring them down on us. Are Joe and Henry far from camp to day?" "At 10 Mile Creek," replied Cameron, with an expression of bitterness, as he caught his gun up and shouted to several men who hurried up on seeing our heroes burst into camp. 10 Mile Creek," muttered Dick. "I'll bring 'em in, though," he continued, glancing at several of the camp horses that grazed close at hand. In another moment he was on Charlie's back. The line of one of the best horses was in his hand, and almost before Cameron knew what he was about, he was flying down the valley like the wind. Charlie often stretched out at full speed to please his young master, but seldom had he been urged forward as he was upon this occasion. The led horse, being light and wild, kept well up, and in a marvelously short space of time they were at 10 Mile Creek. "Hello, Dick, what's to do?" inquired Joe Blunt, who was up to his knees in the water, setting a trap at the moment his friend galloped up. "Injuns! Where's Henry?" demanded Dick. "At the head of the dam there." Dick was off in a moment, and almost instantly returned with Henry galloping beside him. No word was spoken. In a time of action these men did not waste words. During Dick's momentary absence, Joe Blunt had caught up his rifle and examined the priming, so that when Dick pulled up beside him, he merely laid his hands on the saddle, saying, "All right," as he vaulted on Charlie's back behind his young companion. In another moment they were away at full speed. The mustang seemed to feel that unwonted exertions were required of him. Double weighted though he was, he kept well up with the other horse, and in less than 2 hours after Dick's leaving the camp, the three hunters came in sight of it. Meanwhile, Cameron had collected nearly all his forces and put his camp in a state of defense before the Indians arrived, which they did suddenly, and, as usual, at full gallop, to the amount of at least 200. They did not at first seem disposed to hold friendly intercourse with the trappers, but assembled in a semicircle round the camp in a menacing attitude, while one of their chiefs stepped forward to hold a palaver. For some time the conversation on both sides was polite enough, but by degrees the Indian chief assumed an imperious tone, and demanded gifts from the trappers, taking care to enforce his request by hinting that thousands of his countrymen were not far distant. Cameron stoutly refused, and the palaver threatened to come to an abrupt and unpleasant termination just at the time that Dick and his